I sat in my favorite chair, taking another sip from my coffee mug. It was Saturday morning, and the faint smell of fresh brew filled the air. Soft music played in the background, but none of it could lift my mood. The house felt too quiet, and I couldn't shake the heaviness that settled in my chest. Normally, weekends like this were simple and comforting. My wife, Tabitha, and I would spend our days together, filling the silence with chatter about nothing in particular. It wasn't profound, but it was ours. Her voice had always been a constant in this house, like a thread connecting the spaces between us. But this weekend was different. She was gone. I'd expected to spend the long holiday weekend with her, maybe binge-watching one of her favorite shows or tackling the backyard project we'd been putting off. Instead, she was off on some personal journey, leaving me behind to sit here with my coffee in hand, pretending everything was fine. She had left in such a whirlwind of certainty, her suitcase in hand, barely pausing to explain herself. The memory of her departure was still fresh in my mind, like a bruise that hadn't fully formed yet. The emptiness of the house was deafening. I couldn't focus on anything, not even my usual hobbies. I'd tried reading, flipping through the pages of a book without absorbing a single word. I thought about calling a friend but couldn't bring myself to admit that something was wrong. I didn't want to be social, and I certainly didn't want pity. When the doorbell rang, I was almost startled by the sound. I opened the door to find my daughter, Susanna, standing there. She was wearing a long black coat. Her expression was pensive but guarded. She looked like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to start. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice a little too bright to be genuine. "Susie," I replied flatly. "I wasn't expecting you. Your mom's not here right now." "Yeah, I know," she said softly, stepping inside as I held the door open. I glanced at her, trying to gauge what had brought her here. Susanna was 19 and off at college. Over the past couple of years, her relationship with her mom had shifted into something closer to friendship, leaving me on the periphery. Our conversations had become stiff and distant, almost like we didn't know how to connect anymore. "Do you want coffee?" I asked, leading her down the hallway. "Sure," she said, kicking off her boots by the door. Tabitha had insisted on getting one of those fancy pod coffee machines a couple of years ago. Susanna had been thrilled when we bought it, gushing about all the different flavors. Personally, I'd always preferred a basic coffee maker, but I'd compromised, like I had with so many other little things over the years. As the machine hissed and sputtered, I rummaged through the flavors, eventually choosing the caramel macchiato she liked. "So, your mom," I started hesitantly, unsure of how to phrase what I wanted to ask. Susanna rubbed the back of her neck, looking down at the floor. "Yeah, I figured I'd check on you," she said. "See how you're doing." Her tone was cautious, as if she were trying to navigate a minefield without setting anything off. I wasn't sure if she was here as a neutral party or if she'd come as some sort of emissary for Tabitha. "I'm managing," I said, sliding the pod into the machine and pressing the button. "Not great, but I'm managing." "Mom didn't say much about it to me," she offered. "There's not much to say," I replied, my voice flat. She announced she was leaving, suitcase in hand, and walked out the door. "That's it." Susanna frowned, looking like she wanted to argue. "She'll be back Monday, though, right? It's just a weekend trip." "Susanna," I said, trying to keep my tone steady, "this isn't a girl's getaway or a visit with an old friend. She's spending 3 days sharing a bed with another man. There's no dressing that up. It is what it is." Susanna flinched. The word landed heavier than I'd expected. "It's not that bad, Dad," she said, her voice defensive. "She told you, didn't she? She was honest about it. It's not like she's sneaking around." "That doesn't make it better," I said, handing her the coffee. "It's not cheating because she told me? Is that really the line we're drawing here?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly unsure of what to say. I walked into the living room and collapsed into my chair, letting the weight of everything settle back over me. Susanna followed me, perching carefully on the edge of the couch, her drink untouched in front of her. "Don't you think this could be a good thing?" she ventured after a long pause, like a way to get new perspectives or something. I stared at her, unsure if she was serious. "No," I said simply. "It's over, Susie. This is a hard line. and she crossed it. The marriage is over. Her eyes widened, disbelief written all over her face. What are you talking about? You're just upset, Dad. It's not that serious. She's coming back, and everything will go back to normal. Normal? I repeated. How can anything go back to normal after this? She didn't cheat, though, Susanna insisted, her voice rising. She told you. That's different. I shook my head. No, it's not. Being honest about it doesn't undo the betrayal. Fidelity means keeping the promises we made to each other. It's about trust, and she broke that. But it's just a weekend, she said desperately. She's coming back. Susie, the moment she decided that her needs were more important than our relationship, it was over. She didn't just break a promise. She broke something fundamental between us. Susanna looked at me like I just told her the sky wasn't blue. Her hands twisted in her lap, a nervous habit she'd had since she was little. I could see she wanted to keep arguing, but she didn't know how to push past what I just said. Dad, she loves you, she said, her voice quieter now. You're overreacting. This isn't worth throwing away 20 years of marriage over. You can work through it. People do all the time. I leaned back in my chair, looking at her, trying to figure out how much of this she actually believed. She doesn't love me, Susie. Not anymore, I said. That's not true, she shot back immediately, her voice cracking with desperation. It is, I replied, keeping my tone calm, even though the weight of my own words threatened to break me. If she still loved me, she wouldn't be doing this. Love isn't just a feeling, Susanna. It's a choice you make every day. It's choosing your partner, choosing their happiness, choosing the promises you made to them. She didn't choose me this weekend. She just needs some space, she said, her voice trembling. She told me she's been feeling restless, like she's missing out on something. It's not about you, Dad, she said. It's about her. That's why she asked for this. I set my coffee down, staring into the mug for a long moment before looking back at her. Do you know what that tells me? I asked. It tells me she thinks I'm holding her back, that our life together isn't enough. And if that's how she feels, then what's the point? Why should I keep fighting for a marriage that she's already halfway out of? She's not halfway out, Susanna insisted, her hands wringing tighter. She's coming back. To what? I asked sharply. A life she just decided wasn't good enough? A husband she could toss aside for a fling with some random guy from her gym? That's not love, Susanna. That's convenience. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But it's not like she's been lying to you, she said. She told you the truth. Doesn't that mean something? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. No, Susie, I replied. Telling me doesn't make it better. In fact, it makes it worse. Do you know why? Because it means she thought about it. She weighed the decision, considered how much it would hurt me, and still decided to go through with it. Susanna opened her mouth, then closed it again, looking at me like I'd just torn the ground out from under her. You want to know the worst part? I asked. It wasn't even a spur-of-the-moment decision. This wasn't some drunken mistake at a party. She planned this. She talked to you about it, probably talked to her friends about it, maybe even talked to this guy about it. She booked the hotel, packed a bag, and walked out that door, knowing full well what she was doing. That's not a mistake, Susie. That's a choice. She shook her head, her hands still wringing together. She said it was just something she needed to do to be sure about your relationship, she whispered. I couldn't help but laugh, but it was the kind of bitter, humorless laugh that doesn't leave you feeling any better. Sure, about what we've been together for 20 years. We built a life together. We raised you together. If that's not enough to convince her, then nothing ever will be. Maybe she's scared, Susanna said quietly. Maybe she's afraid of settling down for the rest of her life without ever knowing what else is out there. And what about me? I asked, my voice rising slightly. Do I not get to be scared? Do I not get to have doubts? Do I not get to wonder what my life might have looked like if I'd made different choices? The difference is, I didn't act on them. I didn't throw away everything we built together for a taste of something new. Susanna flinched, like I just slapped her, and I immediately felt a pang of guilt. I hadn't meant to lash out at her. None of this was her fault, not really. But the frustration had been building for days, and it was starting to spill over. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Susie, I know you love your mom, and I know you want to believe the best about her. But you have to understand this isn't just about her making a mistake. It's about her showing me through her actions that she doesn't value our marriage the same way I do. She looked down at her lap, her knuckles white from how tightly she was gripping her hands together. So that's it? You're just going to give up, throw it all away? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I'm not the one who gave up, Susanna. She did the moment she walked out that door. She gave up on us. I'm just finally accepting it. Susanna sat silently for a long time after that. Her expression was conflicted. I could see her struggling to reconcile the image she had of her mom with the reality I was laying out in front of her. I didn't blame her. It was hard for me to reconcile, too. I don't know how to fix this, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. You can't, I said gently. This isn't something you can fix, Susie. It's between me and your mom, and honestly, I don't think it's fixable. Some things just break, and you can't put them back together. Her eyes filled with tears, and I felt another pang of guilt. I hated seeing her like this, hated knowing how much pain this was causing her, but I couldn't lie to her. I couldn't give her false hope. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but I need you to understand that this isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the sleeve of her coat. I don't want to lose our family, she said. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to keep my composure. You're not losing your family, Susanna. Your mom and I might not be together anymore, but we'll always be here for you. That hasn't changed. She nodded again, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I knew it would take time for her to really believe it. I think you should go, I said gently. Take some time to think about what I've said, and when you're ready, we can talk again. She stood slowly, her movements heavy and reluctant, like the weight of everything I'd said was pressing down on her. Okay, she said quietly. I walked her to the door, resting a hand on her shoulder as she stepped outside. Take care of yourself, Susie, I said, and call me if you need anything. She nodded again, her eyes downcast, and I watched as she walked to her car and drove away. When the house was quiet again, I went back to my chair and sat down, staring at the cold coffee in my mug. The silence was oppressive, but for the first time, it felt like the right kind of silence, the kind that comes after the storm has passed, when all that's left is to pick up the pieces. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a heavy blanket after Susanna left. I sat there for a long time, staring at the cold coffee in my mug, replaying our conversation in my mind. I wasn't sure if I'd gotten through to her. Part of me hoped I had, while another part worried that I might have been too harsh. But the truth was the truth, no matter how painful it was to hear. I thought about Tabitha and the life we'd built together. The memories came flooding in. Our first date, the night I proposed, the day Susanna was born. All those moments that had seemed so perfect at the time, now tainted by the knowledge that they hadn't been enough for her, for us. Monday evening came faster than I expected. I heard the sound of Tabitha's car pulling into the driveway, and my heart started pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment everything would come to a head. She walked through the door, carrying her suitcase, her hair slightly disheveled but with a glow about her that made my stomach turn. She looked happy, content, like she'd just come back from a relaxing vacation instead of a weekend that had shattered our marriage. Hi, Jack, she said, her voice light and casual, like nothing had happened. I didn't respond right away, just stared at her, trying to process how she could be so nonchalant about everything. When I didn't say anything, her smile faltered, and she set the suitcase down by the door. Look, I know you're upset, she said, her tone soft and almost patronizing. But can we please just sit down and talk about this? I really think we can work through it. I stood up from my chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. There's nothing to talk about, Tabitha. It's over. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. Over, Jack? Come on, don't be like that. It was just a weekend. It didn't mean anything. It meant enough for you to throw away 20 years of marriage, I said, my voice calm but firm. It meant enough for you to put your own desires ahead of our relationship, ahead of everything we've built together. Her face twisted into a mixture of frustration and guilt. You're blowing this out of proportion. I told you about it. I was honest with you. Honesty doesn't undo the betrayal, Tabitha. I said, crossing my arms. You don't get a free pass just because you told me you were going to do it. You still broke the trust between us. You still made a choice to hurt me. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. I'm not interested in your excuses. I've spent the last few days thinking about this, and I've made my decision. I want a divorce. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear in them. Jack, no, you don't mean that, she said. I do, I replied, my voice steady. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Jack, please, she said, her voice breaking. It was just a fling. It didn't mean anything. I love you. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, I said, shaking my head. Love isn't just words, Tabitha. It's actions, and your actions made it very clear where your priorities are. Tears started streaming down her face, and she took a step toward me, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted, but I know now. Jack, I know I want you. I want us, she said. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. You didn't need to sleep with another man to figure that out, and honestly, I don't think you really do know what you want. But I know what I want. A partner who values me, who respects me, and who doesn't treat our relationship like something disposable. Her sobs grew louder, and she dropped her hands, letting them fall limply at her sides. I made a mistake, Jack, a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can start over. It's too late for that, I said, my voice firm. Some things can't be undone, Tabitha. Some things can't be fixed. She looked at me with desperation in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Anger. So that's it? You're just going to throw away everything we've built together, just like that? I'm not the one who threw it away, I replied. That was you. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, the weight of everything that had been said hanging heavy in the air. Finally, she turned away, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. Fine, she said, her voice cold now. If that's how you feel, then I guess there's nothing left to say. There isn't, I said simply. She grabbed her suitcase and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where she'd been standing before, then turning and walking out the front door. I needed air. I needed space. I didn't know what the future would look like, but for the first time in days, I felt a small spark of clarity. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. I deserved better than what Tabitha had given me, and I wasn't going to settle for less anymore. Here's the next story, surprise gone wrong. I wasn't expecting this reaction when I presented him to my new AP in the next life. I will never trust a guy again. Men are really deceitful. I attempted to surprise my spouse with my affair after we began our relationship, but the fool decided to divorce me instead. Hello, my name is Taylor. I am 28 years old and I am married to Lincoln, a 48-year-old surgeon. Lincoln and I have been married for 2 years. I wouldn't call my marriage to Lincoln pleasant because I was miserable during the years we were married. I've always believed that I married a loving man who cared about my happiness, but the events of the last month have proven otherwise. I am about to lose everything, and I don't know what to do right now. People often believe I married Lincoln because of his money, given our considerable age difference, but that is not the case. I married Lincoln for who he is, not his money. People often say that older guys are more loving, generous, and compassionate. I discovered this to be accurate because Lincoln possesses all of these characteristics. But following the wedding, I got melancholy. I wanted more from my life. Now, Lincoln is a wonderful guy, but our age gap became an issue. I wanted to live freely, have fun, and enjoy life to the maximum. Lincoln was cautious and conservative, even though he was extremely wealthy. He chose a low-key lifestyle. To be honest, life with him was rather boring. I noticed all of this while we were dating, but I believed I could persuade him to change as time went on. That's why I went ahead and married him. However, after the wedding, I realized how difficult it is to alter anyone. I desired to live a lighthearted, buoyant lifestyle. This was one of the reasons I married Lincoln in the first place. God sent Lincoln to me, He has altered my life in the few years that I've known him. But the only issue I had with him was that he was uninteresting. Our marriage isn't exciting, and our intimacy isn't particularly noteworthy. Aside from that, Lincoln is a kind-hearted individual. He always ensures that I have everything I need. After our wedding, he built a jewelry store for me and bought me a car. Lincoln is willing to do anything for me. All I need to do is ask. He once told me I was his soulmate and that he was willing to go above and beyond for me. He consistently followed through on his promises. He put my retired parents on a monthly stipend and is now financing 2 of my siblings in school. Not only that, but Lincoln also gave my parents a stunning car for their wedding anniversary. My parents refer to him as the son they never had. Lincoln is quite down to earth when he goes grocery shopping. He also shops for my folks. When I count my blessings, I include him several times. However, the absence of consistent closeness and enjoyment in our marriage made me melancholy. I couldn't afford to lose my spouse, so I confided in my best friend, Anita, who offered several recommendations. So, we devised a plan. Thinking back, I regret everything because that marked the beginning of my nightmares. On one fateful day, after Lincoln had returned from work, freshened up, and eaten dinner, I told him we needed to talk about something serious. I began by telling him how lonely I was in our marriage and how I wanted to spice things up. Lincoln was taken aback, but after a few minutes, he informed me he had heard and would attempt to improve himself and make some adjustments. I told him I had some suggestions for how to spice up our marriage. He said he'd try anything to make me happy. Then, boom, I advised him we should try to have an open marriage. Lincoln's expression that day was something else. He was astounded. After some time, he asked me to explain what I meant in clear, unambiguous language. I definitely told him that we should try to see other individuals. He asked why, and I just told him I wanted to be happy. He grinned and said it wasn't a problem. He's down with whatever makes me happy. He requested me to take him along and notify him when I spotted someone. I was astonished because it wasn't what I expected. I expected him to create a scene, but he was calm. If only I'd known it was all an act and that he was boiling with rage inside, I would not have proceeded with my idiotic intentions. That was the stillness before the storm. My best buddy, Anita, introduced me to a few guys. I honestly thought she was there to help me and wanted me to be happy. I had no idea she had hidden goals. Anita introduced me to Stanley. Stanley was a sweet and affectionate man, young, lively, and engaging. Stanley and I were about the same age, so we had a lot in common. Stanley and I started dating, and everything was going well. I wanted to tell Lincoln about it, but my best friend, Anita, cautioned against it. She encouraged me to get to know Stanley before telling my husband about it. I wish I hadn't listened to that devil incarnate. I took Anita's suggestion and kept dating Stanley in secret, since I was loving it. I also appreciated Stanley's company. Stanley didn't work, therefore I had to pay all of his bills. I even went on vacation with him to Bora Bora. I was the one who sponsored the trip, pretending to be on a work trip to find some jewelry for Lincoln. He trusted me because it wasn't my first time traveling for business. The one-way trip to Bora Bora Island with Stanley was wonderful. I relished every moment of it because no one knew who I was. I had plenty of time to relax and enjoy my boyfriend. When I returned from that trip, I wanted to surprise Lincoln with my new affair. That day, he was relaxed and cheerful, so I decided to break the news to him. I told him I had some excellent news and asked him to guess. He tried to guess but couldn't figure it out, so I decided to reveal the secret. First, I reminded him of how he granted his agreement and blessing for me to visit other people. Guess what? Lincoln told me he does not recall anything like it. I reminded him of how he accepted our open relationship. I went on to tell him that I had started dating someone and it had been 3 months, and I wanted to be sure of the person before surprising him with the wonderful news. At this moment, Lincoln was already furious. His face was crushed. I could see wrinkles on his face, and everything broke free when I informed him about my vacation with Stanley. Lincoln stood up and began making a scene. He grabbed my phone and banged it against the wall before I could make sense of what was happening. Lincoln gave me 3 filthy slaps on the face. My face felt hot, like if someone had poured boiling water on it. He said I must be joking if I thought he'd ever agree to such a stupid proposition. He explained that he had been aware of everything and was simply waiting for me to open my gutter mouth and spill. I was dumbfounded. He explained that he had been tracking my movements and was aware of everything I did. Lincoln looked me in the eye and told me that the marriage was over and that I should gather my possessions and leave his home. While I was still figuring out everything, he went upstairs and started throwing away my possessions. I was surprised by how everything turned out. I reminded Lincoln that he had vowed to go above and beyond for me. I labeled him a liar and a phony, and he dubbed me a gold-digging prostitute. He told me I couldn't have it both ways and that if I wanted to have an open relationship, I should do it outside of his house, since he wouldn't allow such nonsense inside. He said I'd hear from his lawyer soon and that he'd divorce me so I could be free and have as much fun as I wanted. At this time, I realized he was serious, and I began pleading with him to pardon me. He said it was too late and I should get lost. He threw all of my belongings out. Even small items like my toothbrush and underwear were thrown away. Following that, Lincoln dragged me outside and told me to get lost. What should I do, gentlemen? I need advice. I believe I have used my hands to destroy my home. Please, I need advice on how to appease Lincoln so that he would forgive me. Please be courteous, as I will be in the comments section. Update. I'm back to update my story. So, Lincoln kicked me out that night. My belongings were scattered across the floor. Worst of all, Lincoln refused to let me take the car he bought for me. He seized my car keys, asking if there was any damage. My phone was gone, so I couldn't phone anybody. One of our neighbors used her phone to help me book a ride. My head was heated, so I headed straight to the motel. I just wanted to think about what to do next. I cried on the hotel bed, and then the next day, I returned to the house, assuming Lincoln was already there. But nothing prepared me for the embarrassment I experienced. I arrived and met Lincoln's mother and sisters at their home. When they saw me, all hell broke loose. They began hurling abuses at me. Lincoln's mother branded me a shameless harlot. She said that I married her son for financial reasons rather than because I genuinely loved him. She told me that I broke not only Lincoln's heart but also hers because she loved and considered me her daughter. At that time, I couldn't keep back my tears. I started sobbing like a child. I got to my knees and begged them to forgive me and petition Lincoln on my behalf. The Lincoln sisters lost it and started causing a commotion. They hauled me out and asked me to be permanently lost in their brother's life. While all of this was happening, Lincoln was not home. So, I stepped outside and decided to wait for him. After a few hours of waiting in the hot sun, Lincoln came. He got out of his car and inquired why I came back. I burst into tears and pleaded with him the moment I saw him. He informed me he had made up his mind and that nothing could change it. He walked inside his car and took out a paper. While he was still speaking, he threw the paper at me and then drove off. I picked up the papers and, lo and behold, they were divorce papers. At this point, I began wailing. It felt like my entire existence had been wrecked. I departed from my folks' house because I had lost all hope by this time. My parents were surprised to see me alone, as I had always visited them with Lincoln since we married. They inquired about Lincoln and why I arrived alone, with tears in my eyes. I described everything to them, telling them how Lincoln and I decided to have an open relationship, only for him to kick me out once I followed through on it. My parents told me that they would not pass judgment on the problem until they heard from Lincoln, because it is better to hear both perspectives. They asked him to come over the next day, so they could hear his side of the story. Lincoln holds a high regard for my parents, so I was only half certain that he would listen to them. He even treats my parents like they are his. That night, I could not sleep. I was simply thinking and praying about everything. I don't think I've ever prayed as earnestly for anything as I did that night. I desperately desired a miracle. I wanted my hubby. I wanted my opulent lifestyle back, because I was nearly bankrupt from living in hotels and spending money on transportation. After what seemed to be the longest night ever, it was finally dawn. A few hours later, Lincoln came. He ignored me and went to meet my parents, not even welcoming them properly as he used to. My parents inquired for his side of the tale, and he went on to explain everything in detail. He informed my folks about how I cheated on him and wasted his money, how I lied to him about going on a business trip and traveled to Bora Bora Island on holiday behind his back. To say my folks were disappointed would be an understatement. Their expressions of displeasure were clear. My parents couldn't say a thing. I suppose they were too ashamed to talk, with their heads lowered and voices low. They begged Lincoln to forgive me and forget everything. Lincoln became annoyed by their statement, and heating it up, he told my parents that he would never forgive me. He informed them that the marriage was finished at this moment. He rose up, and as he was ready to depart, asked for the keys to the car he had purchased for my parents' anniversary. Everyone was shocked. The entire room was quiet. He informed my parents that because he was no longer married to me, there was no reason for them to keep the car. They gave him the automobile keys, and he called someone to come get it. At that point, I realized that I had no idea the person I married was a soulless monster. I mean, what kind of man returns a gift he provided willingly? Only a shameless man can sink thus low. I had no idea he had such a strong temper. Honestly, I had never seen this side of him. Lincoln's selfish acts infuriated me, so I signed the divorce papers. Our first hearing is coming up soon, and I'll be back shortly to inform you on how things went. Update. Hello. Here's an update on my tale. So, our divorce proceedings began, and Lincoln made sure I didn't receive a thing. I could not afford a good lawyer since I was penniless. That was how I lost everything. I didn't receive a single penny, but I didn't care because I still had the store. While this was going on, I kept my manager in charge of the store, and he kept me updated on everything. Following the divorce, I chose to return to the store because it was my only hope. When I arrived at the store one fateful day, I was surprised to learn that Lincoln had sold it off. I was taken aback when I saw new faces at my store. At that point, I called my store manager. He categorically stated that the store's new owners laid them off after Lincoln sold it. I asked him why he didn't notify me, and he reminded me of how he attempted to call me several times before. To be honest, he tried to call several times, but I always told him no because I was going through a difficult divorce and didn't want to add to my difficulties. When I requested the store's account, I was assured that Lincoln had cleared it. I nearly fainted at that point. My legs felt shaky. Nothing else made sense to me. I had no idea Lincoln was this heartless. He took everything from me. He virtually destroyed my life. The reason I didn't bother hiring top lawyers to assist me in obtaining half of Lincoln's assets was the store. I figured I could fall back on it. Another reason I didn't fight for his assets was that I didn't want people to think I was a gold digger. If I had known he was going to sell the store, I would have sued and torn his properties apart. Now, I sincerely regret everything. Now my family was not spared from his torment. Remember how I said he always provided my parents a monthly allowance? He stopped doing so. He also stopped paying my siblings' school payments. Lincoln was not a good man. He was just pretending to be a kind-hearted man. He is both petty and strong-hearted. It dawned on me that Link's purpose was to entirely ruin my life. I was totally broke. He grabbed all of the expensive jewelry he had bought for me. I resolved to go confront Lincoln at his residence, and I had the biggest shock of my life. I got to the residence and saw my best friend, Anita, who urged me to cheat on Lincoln and disguise it at my marriage and ex-matrimonial homes. I had to clean my eyes several times to ensure that I could see well, despite the agony in my voice. I asked her what she was doing in the house now that she knew Lincoln and I were no longer together. "God eyes, my best buddy." She looked me in the eye and said she was at her boyfriend's house. I nearly fainted at that point. It required all of my strength to maintain standing. She opened her nasty mouth and called me an idiot. She called me dumb for cheating on a man who loved and supported me and my family. She informed me that men like Lincoln are rare. She informed me that she had always envied my marriage, as I had Lincoln. She told me a lot of things that day, going on and on about how the world worked in her favor and that everything happened because she and Lincoln were meant to be together. I couldn't take any more, so I dashed up to meet Lincoln in the bedroom. I was shaking and crying. I questioned why he chose to inflict so severe pain on me. It hurts to know that Lincoln moved on only a month after our divorce and not with anybody else, but with my best friend. Lincoln opened his foolish mouth and instructed me to stop crying crocodile tears. He said he didn't owe me an explanation because we weren't married anymore, and I didn't have the right to tell him who and who not to date. I felt betrayed. While we were still conversing, Anita walked in and ordered me to leave because I had no right to be in the room. She asked me to leave her bedroom. I expected Lincoln to call her to order, but I was surprised when he seconded it and asked me to leave. Life is really amusing. I never imagined that such a day would occur when I was chased out of my marriage bedroom by another woman, and it was my best buddy who brought this calamity upon me. I informed them I was not leaving until I received answers to my queries. I asked Lincoln why he had decided to wreck my life by taking everything away. He told me he promised to steal everything from me after realizing I never loved him and simply married him for his money. He claimed he had also promised himself that he would leave me impoverished and miserable. Hearing all of this made me realize that guys are terrible. It occurred to me that Lincoln never truly loved me because if he did, he would not be able to look me in the face and spill that trash. I wiped my eyes and departed on the ride home. I continued thinking about everything. How dumb of me to have listened to and followed Anita's ridiculous plans. I never realized she had always envied me. I felt betrayed by Lincoln and Anita. I am the victim in this case. So many thoughts were racing through my mind. I wanted to get to the bottom of it because I suspected Lincoln and Anita were seeing each other and had planned the entire affair. So, I called Stanley, my former sweetheart. Stanley was broke, so I ended things with him when I left my marriage. I even paid his bills when we were dating, so I didn't want to add to my existing liabilities. I ended our connection, but I called him that day because I believed he was also part of the plan. I pleaded with him to please give any information he had. I didn't intend to confront anyone, but I needed to have closure. Stanley informed me that Anita had arranged everything. He informed me that he and Anita divided the money I was providing him. He told me that Anita told Lincoln about our affair when we first started dating. It turned out that my best friend was my husband's spy. He told me that Anita had also informed Lincoln about our vacation. At that time, I felt foolish and betrayed, and I developed depression. Nothing mattered to me now. I decided to get therapy because I thought I was going mad. I started treatment, and it was the best move I've ever made. I am still trying to let go and forgive myself for all of my stupid mistakes. Nothing makes sense anymore, but I'll grin again. My therapist made me realize that while I was a victim, I also damaged my ex-husband's heart and trust. She urged me to call him and apologize for all the grief I caused him. I called Lincoln several times to apologize, but he never responded. I did send him a text, though. I hope he finds a place in his heart and forgives me one day. I heard Lincoln dumped Anita once he was done with her. Her karma arrived early. She got served. She wanted everything I had, but regrettably, she will never have them. She is back on the street where she actually belongs. It has been months, but everything still feels like yesterday. The recollections are still fresh. I am currently job-seeking while staying with my parents. Every day, my parents and siblings never miss an opportunity to remind me how they believe my actions, driven by lust and selfishness, have ruined both my life and theirs. My siblings loathe me, and they continue to blame and curse me to this day. I aim to find a decent-paying job soon, so that my siblings can return to school. I am taking each day as it comes. Looking back, I regret everything. If I could go back in time, I would make different decisions. Maybe if I hadn't listened to Anita, I would have stayed married or confided in my parents or siblings. Maybe things would have gone differently, just maybe. I've always been afraid of putting my drama out there for everyone to see because I was ashamed. But now, I don't care. I feel broken, used, as if my world has ended, and I have no idea what to do. My name is Dawson, and I am 33 years old. I'm still relatively young. It's not like I'm ancient or something. And my wife has to seek pleasure elsewhere. My wife's name is Veronica, and she is 32. Veronica and I have been married for nearly a year, but we have known each other for almost our whole lives. We were childhood sweethearts and dated throughout high school and college. We were the type of pair that would want to spend the rest of their lives together. We have a 2-year-old who is my whole universe. From embarrassing teenage crushes to the time we exchanged vows, I have always treasured our relationship. I feel Veronica and I were meant to be, which is why I chose to ignore several of the red signs we experienced. Ups and downs, like any other couple, however. Nothing prepared me for what transpired recently. I'm sharing this because I need to get something off my chest. Perhaps someone out there has some advice, or has been through something similar. Let me begin by noting that I grew up in an extremely terrible and religious environment. I never left my home, and the church did not believe in divorce. They taught that marriage was a holy connection that should never be severed, regardless of the circumstances. This made me feel confined, especially when my relationship with Veronica deteriorated. My family believed Veronica was wonderful and could do no wrong, when in reality, she did a lot of wrong. Even when I told them about the problems we were having, they constantly spun it and blamed me. They'd say things like, "You need to be more understanding," or "She's just stressed about the baby." They completely ignored the fact that she was mistreating me. They were also the only people I could speak to from a young age. I was told that therapy was a fraud, a sin, and a swindle. The church taught us that seeking help other than prayer and religious guidance was a sign of weakness and lack of faith. I know now that's not true, but I can't shake the theology that's been driven into my head for so long. This made it extremely difficult for me to seek professional aid or even contact friends outside of the religion. The worry of being judged or rejected was always with me. I am still terrified of my parents. Their hold on me is so powerful that it is difficult to break free, even now. I believe that all of these things blinded me to the obvious warning signs that Veronica presented. Her manipulation, refusal to contribute financially, lavish spending, and frequent disparaging of me were things I should have expected. But I had been conditioned to believe that my responsibility was to suffer and provide for my own well-being at any cost. I paid all of the bills because Veronica refused to work, even before we had a child. She couldn't stay at one job for long because there was always something wrong with it, or her coworkers. After moving from job to job, she eventually quit looking and refused to consider it whenever I brought it up. She would turn it on me, even involving my parents, since she knew they would support her. They did it every time, telling me that it was my responsibility as a man to work and pay the bills, not Veronica's. Then she insisted that we marry. I rejected the idea because my parents' marriage was not the healthiest. They stayed together for their children and did not believe in divorce. This had a significant negative impact on my opinion of marriage. But Veronica persisted. Then she became pregnant. At the time, I assumed it was just a birth control error, but now I see that she must have ensnared me with the pregnancy. After that, she got my parents involved again, and they gaslight and pressured me for a year until I caved in and married her. The wedding itself was a nightmare. I could write an entire book about it. Veronica dictated all of my decisions, pushing me to pay for everything and insisting on a costly ceremony despite the fact that she would not contribute a dime. She even had me pay for an expensive honeymoon. I had no say over anything. She dictated everything, and I was left to pay for it all. After the wedding, Veronica revealed her true colors. She told me she wanted to be a stay-at-home parent because she saw how hard I worked to pay the bills and wanted to contribute by being present for our child. At first, I assumed it was a noble decision on her behalf, but I soon discovered it was all a lie. One day, while she was gone, I searched her phone and discovered communications between her and her friends. She was ridiculing me, calling me foolish, and joking about how she never planned to return to work. It was a heartbreaking revelation. She had duped me into believing she was making a sacrifice for our family, while in reality, she was simply searching for a way out of work. I confronted her about the messages and attempted to discuss it with my parents, thinking they would see my point of view. But they backed her, claiming she was stressed out by me and the kid, which is why she said those things. Of course, Veronica denied everything and turned on me, accusing me of invading her privacy and being neurotic. Until today, I had no idea how much she had alienated me from my own family. She would distort situations and conversations such that I appeared to be the unreasonable one. She turned my parents against me, and they often took her side in arguments, leaving me feeling absolutely alone. She then ceased doing her tasks despite the fact that I paid all of the bills. I still shared the housework and even babysitting with Veronica. I didn't mind that I had to get up early for work. I would still wake up at night if the baby cried. I made careful to split the TKS with her 50/50ths, but she still refused to complete her portion. When I asked her about it, she would dismiss me, stating her hands were full with our toddler, which I tried to accept, but the truth was that I helped with childcare a lot, and she wasn't constantly busy with our toddler. My parents came over frequently and assisted with the baby, so she wasn't always overwhelmed. My parents even babysat for free, giving her plenty of time to get things done. Despite all of her assistance, She refused to help with domestic tasks. The dishes would pile up until I got to them. The laundry remained undone until I could finish it, and the house was in perpetual mess until I got the opportunity and free time to clean and organize. It wasn't simply the tasks. It was also a complete lack of respect and appreciation for all I did. I was working long hours to support our family while also caring for the infant at home. However, when I attempted to address the situation, Veronica responded as if it was entirely my responsibility. She would grow defensive, accusing me of not understanding how difficult it was to be a stay-at-home parent. She claimed she was fatigued after caring for our kid all day, but I knew that wasn't the whole story. There were other occasions when I returned home to discover her on her phone, watching TV, or out with friends while my parents watched the baby. It became evident that Veronica was taking advantage of the circumstances. She relished the benefits of being a stay-at-home parent without truly carrying out the obligations that came with it. I was left to juggle work, daycare, and housekeeping while she did what she wanted. It was difficult and upsetting to see how little she wanted to contribute to our household. I began to dread returning home because I knew I would be faced with a mess and Veronica's list of complaints. Instead, I felt as if I were carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders with no help from the person who was supposed to be my partner. Then she started arguing with me more. She said that I was no longer entertaining and had become boring. It seemed like everything I did irritated her. She claimed I was distant, which I was not. She was the remote one. It seemed as if she was rewriting our history to suit her narrative. She found fault in everything I did. If I left a plate in the sink, she'd freak out. If I arrived home 5 minutes later than scheduled, she would accuse me of not caring about her or the kid. She'd shout at me about the simplest things, turning little disagreements into full-fledged fights. It felt as if I were walking on eggshells. I was never sure what would set her off next. She used to threaten me whenever we had a disagreement. She'd say things like, "You'll regret this," or "You'll be sorry if you don't begin treating me better." It was manipulative and emotionally exhausting. I wasn't sure how to respond to her threats. I only wanted calm in our home. She started buying pricey purchases without notifying me, though our finances were meant to be shared. However, she acted as if my credit card was her own bank account. She once ordered a $700 purse using my credit card. When I challenged her about it, she shouted and began accusing me of being controlling and stingy. To make matters worse, she convinced my parents to back her up. They claimed that my money was hers, and I had no right to dispute her purchases. It was infuriating. I felt like I had no allies, and no one understood what I was going through. She declined to discuss the purchases with me whenever I tried to bring it up. She ignored me or changed the subject. She operated as if she was entitled to spend whatever she pleased, with no regard for our budget or financial goals. It was more than just the money. It was also a lack of respect and communication. These difficulties were not isolated events. They formed part of a broader pattern. She was getting more domineering and abusive. Her actions were pushing me further away, and no matter how hard I tried to rectify things, nothing seemed to be enough. I wanted our marriage to work, but it was becoming impossible. The incessant fighting, threats, and financial irresponsibility were simply too much. I was losing hope and wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on. I should have left sooner, but I was afraid, not only for me but also for the baby. She also began to nitpick about everything, including the sex and closeness. She claimed that we didn't have enough sex and that I was too soft. We were having sex 3 or 4 times every week, but it wasn't enough for her. She would continuously complain that I wasn't meeting her wants, and it felt as if nothing I did was ever good enough. I was doing everything I could to keep her happy, but it seemed like the goalposts were constantly moving. She began to be quite secretive with her phone. She insisted that I reveal my whereabouts to her, but she refused to share hers. My parents supported her, stating she was home all day as a stay-at-home parent while I worked. They argued that she needed to know where I was in case of an emergency and that I should trust her because she was always with the baby. I gave in and shared my location, but she would not share hers. She would accuse me of cheating at random, despite the fact that she was acting strangely and secretively. It was as if she was putting her guilt on me, attempting to make me the bad guy. She reset her phone's password and was constantly smiling at the screen, which, of course, is a great honor in its own right. But the fact that she kept it so covert raised red flags. She'd be messaging someone, and when I asked who it was, she'd simply say it was a buddy and swiftly put her phone away. I was worried by more than simply her secrecy. It was the abrupt change in her conduct. She stopped showing affection and began making excuses to avoid spending time together. She'd spend hours shopping or running errands, and when I asked about her day, she'd provide vague responses. I felt like a stranger in my own house. I tried to discuss it with her, but every conversation escalated into an argument. She'd accuse me of being paranoid or controlling, which always ended with her storming out. I was bewildered and hurt. I wanted to believe her, to accept that she was just going through a phase, but the symptoms were difficult to ignore. It wasn't simply the lack of sex or the incessant criticism. It was about a breakdown of trust and connection. I was losing my wife, and there was nothing I could do about it. Little did I know that my wife was seriously cheating on me, using me, and even manipulating my parents. Yesterday, I ended work much later than usual. I emailed my wife that I might work overnight, but then realized I didn't have to remain. I intended to text her and tell her, but I changed my mind. Instead, I organized a surprise takeout meal and a quick home date. Things have been stressful between us lately, and I'm hoping that this would help us reconnect. Our son was staying at my parents' house, which we had previously clashed about, but didn't seem significant now. When I arrived home and knocked on the door, a shirtless, drunk man opened it. He seemed perplexed, then surprised to see me. That's when it struck me. My wife had cheated. The guy simply stood there, unsure of what to do, frozen in place. I ran upstairs, expecting some explanation from my wife, only to discover her deep asleep in bed. I felt bewildered and hurt. I rushed back downstairs, but the man had already disappeared. The shock struck me hard. Betrayal, anger, disbelief, everything flashed through my head. How long has this been happening? Who was this guy? Why would my wife do that? I was enraged and heartbroken. I felt outraged and hurt. I wasn't sure what to do. A part of me wanted to rouse her up and demand explanations, but I could not bear the sight of her so angry and betrayed. I grabbed some clothing and fled while she was still sleeping. I drove straight to my parents' house, where they were astonished to see me and immediately realized something was wrong. I didn't feel like conversing, so I checked on our sleeping child and rested in my old room. This morning, my phone was constantly vibrating with calls and texts from my wife. I'm dreading picking up because I'm not sure what to say to her. I'm guessing she already understands what's going on, especially if she has been in contact with the intoxicated guy from last night. So here I am, trying to occupy myself and make sense of it all. Update. Hey. Read it. Hi. It has been several days. I apologize. Things have been challenging. I greatly appreciate your help. It has been quite useful. When I wrote this post, it was simply a rant. I was not expecting the quantity of traffic it received. Now, let's just pray this doesn't make its way to my wife. Or should I say, my ex-wife. LOL. Before I get started with the update, I'd like to address a few often asked questions. What was the disagreement I had with my wife over our infant sleeping at my parents' house? As I previously stated, this is not very relevant to the context, but basically, I thought, and still believe, our infant is too young for sleepovers with my parents. He's only 2, but my wife disagrees, claiming she needs breaks every now and then. She gets plenty of breaks, and I always take care of the baby when I return from work. She also knew how I felt about my parents and how I didn't want my child to grow up too close to them because of their beliefs. But since my parents always supported her, she also disagreed with me on it. Who is the intoxicated person in our house? I do not know him, but I can now affirm that my wife was sleeping with him. Will I get a divorce? Yes, cheating was the last nail in the coffin. Do I have an attorney? Yes. He is a close friend, and I will contact him. Those are the most common questions I noticed. I haven't updated recently because my job and coming to grips with things are difficult for me. I spoke with my employer, who was quite sympathetic and offered me a break if I wanted one. However, I turned it down since I believe it would drive me insane. The baby and work are the two things that are keeping me sane right now. Regarding genuine updates, I'm sorry to tell that not much has transpired, as I previously stated. My wife began calling me frequently, and she eventually called my parents. I'm not sure what she told them, but my parents entered my room and began berating me. When I eventually explained what had happened to them, they calmed down. They said that was not what my wife told them, but they also refused to tell me what she said. My parents then departed to call my wife and, after a while, they returned and informed me that I would have to attempt to forgive her because divorce was not an option and that she was truly sorry. I told them to leave my room because I needed to ponder. They obliged and went, and that's when I contacted my wife and told her I was done and that she must be cheating on me. We had a lengthy talk, which I will obviously not repeat word for word, but she basically copped to cheating on me with that person. She said they had gotten intoxicated and apologized for it. That's when I informed her that there was no need because I wanted a divorce. She freaked out, hung up on me, and quickly contacted my parents, who returned to the room and told me that divorce was a sin. I told them to leave me alone, and I have been ignoring them for the last few days. I've been ignoring calls from my wife and my parents too. Thankfully, my wife has not attempted to come and take the baby. I've spent every free moment with him. Update. Hey, this is me again. Thank you everybody for your great feedback. They keep coming, and it truly means a lot. I apologize for not updating in a long while, but I do have an update now. You've been messaging me wanting an update, and I appreciate your care. It's been a few weeks, maybe 2 weeks, since my previous post, and things have been crazy. First and foremost, when my parents discovered I was serious about divorce, they worried. They continued preaching about how it was a sin and that I'd go to hell. To be honest, that triggered something in me. I snapped, and I exploded on my parents. I told them to quit attempting to govern my life and that I was an adult, not a child. I told them I was not only getting divorced but also leaving the religion. I informed them that I would no longer be going because it was a nasty, judgmental environment. My folks freaked out, and when I returned home from work the next day, I was met with an intervention. My parents had invited the pastor, some church members, and my wife. I didn't want to appear crazy. I knew how they could tell stories, so I sat down with them and spoke politely, stating my reasoning. When I saw they couldn't see reason, I took the infant and left the house. It was fantastic. I brought the baby to get ice cream, and we went about for a while. I mostly carried him, but I didn't mind. I returned home hours later, and everyone had departed, save my parents. But I knew I'd never be at peace, so I informed my parents that I was moving out. They panicked and attempted to persuade me not to, but I refused to listen. I'm excited to be moving in with a friend soon. I'll also be catching up with my lawyer pals soon. They were out of town and have only recently returned. That's all for now. I'll provide an update as I have additional information to offer. Thank you for your continued support. Update. This is me again. I promised to provide an update whenever I had more to discuss, so here we go. It's only been a week since my previous update, but a lot has happened. First and foremost, I've moved out, just as I said I would. My parents assumed I was joking because I did not move out right away. They were stunned when I eventually did. They called me a variety of names and attempted to gaslight and manipulate me, but this time I didn't listen. They even refused to let me go with the baby, but I just told them I'd call the cops. Now, I'm at my friend's house, and I'm feeling better and more relaxed. I also met up with my lawyer friend, which went well. Allow me to show you inside. I own the home where my wife is now staying. I just haven't got the strength to kick her out yet, but my lawyer will handle it now. Fortunately, because I purchased the house before marrying my wife, it is not considered a marital asset and remains completely mine. My grandfather gave us the house as a gift. Furthermore, we live in a state where cheating immediately results in the loss of custody. I have a high chance of having the baby, which is the one thing I am truly willing to battle for. This legal advantage has been a big help, and it gives me optimism that I can provide a stable home for my child. My connection with my parents has been a roller coaster. They were devastated and outraged when I moved out. They besieged me with calls and messages, attempting to guilt-trip me into returning and reconciling with my wife, but I held my ground. I made it plain that their manipulative tactics would no longer work on me. They even tried to use other family members and friends to put pressure on me, but I expressed my position to everyone, and the majority of them understood and supported my decision. I told those who didn't, go kick rocks. Living with my pal has been like a breath of fresh air. I'm finally free of the toxic environment and relentless monitoring. My friend has been wonderfully supportive, lending a listening ear and assisting with the baby. We've settled into a new rhythm, and for the first time in a long time, I feel optimistic about the future. I've also started looking for professional aid to deal with everything. Regardless of my upbringing, I decided to consult a therapist. I'm still on the wait list, so I can't say much about it yet. My wife is still attempting to reach out, sending messages and calling incessantly. She has apologized excessively, claiming she made a mistake and wishes to sort things out. But I've made it obvious that there is no going back. The trust has been destroyed, and I cannot subject myself or our child to such volatility. I'm taking things one step at a time with the goal of improving my life and that of my child. There is still a long road ahead of me, but I am prepared to face whatever comes next. Thank you for your ongoing support and good thoughts. They've meant everything to me during this difficult period. I'll keep you posted on any fresh developments. Update. Hey, it has been a while, months to be precise. I'm sorry for not posting in such a long period. Life got busy, and I sort of forgot. I owe you an update, and I apologize for not providing it sooner. First and foremost, the divorce has been finalized, and I have lost communication with both my parents and my ex. There's not much to say about the judicial proceedings. It was a brief struggle, thankfully. She cheated, and as a result, she had her custody taken away. She generated quite a stir in court and didn't receive anything. There is no alimony or anything from the house. We had barely been married a year, so we had no debts to split. Everyone just separated their finances and went their own way. I obtained custody, and she had visitation privileges, which was the finest outcome. She continued to try to approach me and resolve things outside the courthouse, but I ignored her and instructed her not to contact me unless it was about the baby, and that's it. I also received a raise at work, which implies more money for me, but also longer hours. However, I am really good at juggling everything. I still spend a lot of time with the infant and occasionally take him with me to work. He just has a short time till he enters preschool. Remember how I indicated in my previous post that my lawyer would assist me in kicking Veronica out? She refused to go because she had nowhere to go, but she was eventually evicted. I returned to the house because, despite the unpleasant recollections, it was the closest to work and had a shorter commute than my friend's house. And that is how my life is now. I don't talk to my ex very much, unless it's regarding the kid, and I rarely talk to my parents. I no longer attend church, and I'm so pleased. I'm also in treatment, which has been quite beneficial. Thank you all very much. Your words meant a lot to me and helped me while I was in a terrible place. I will be eternally grateful, and I pray no one else ever has to go through what I did. Life is much better today. I found serenity and contentment, and I'm working to create a positive atmosphere for my child.